What if extinction didn't have to be forever? In my time covering paleo documentaries on my channel, very few have ever been requested nearly as much as one name in particular, not only for its diverse selection of prehistoric creatures, but also for its undeniable impact on the world of paleo media as a whole. By all accounts, this was the gold standard for paleo science, and yet, despite all of that, I had never actually seen it before this video. Yes, me, the dino nerd, didn't watch what some claim to be was the best paleo documentary ever made. But is it actually? Because while it did escape my childhood, this does provide me an opportunity to look at the show through unbiased and fresh eyes, in order to see if this series not only holds up, but if it's actually as good as everyone says it is. So today, I have to ask you, do you remember Prehistoric Park? Released in 2006 by the ITV, Prehistoric Park was a bold and exciting experiment of the 2000s, as not only was it a show that brought extinct creatures to a conservation park, but also experimented with strong narratives by showing these wonderful and terrifying creatures through the eyes of scientists, vets, and of course, our beloved Nigel Marven. Now, for those of you who don't know who Nigel is, he's essentially the Steve Irwin of paleo media, and the guy who got eaten by a giga that one time. He's a legend in this space, with not only his love and passion for these creatures shining through, but his charming charisma and childlike wonder being just such an infectious hook for us to hold, as we feel not only guided by someone who knows his stuff, but by someone who shares our same fascination for this prehistory world. Nigel is the gem to not only Prehistoric Park, but paleo media as a whole. There is no Prehistoric Park without Nigel. But what was Prehistoric Park even about? Well, essentially, Prehistoric Park follows Nigel and some of the other park workers as they aim to save ancient animals from extinction by bringing them back from their time periods to South Africa for the sake of conservation, which basically means that unlike Jurassic Park, this has no guests and is essentially animals first. Now, from that premise, we get a lot of fun and interesting stories as we get to explore the life of these beloved creatures like Tyrannosaurus rex, as well as the woolly mammoth. But also in saying that, we get an insight into more lesser known creatures who might have not been getting the attention they deserved at the time, like Microraptor for instance. And immediately, what I have to praise about this show was for how it made each of these stories entertaining. There's ever rarely a dull or uninteresting moment in Prehistoric Park, as they balance both blood-pumping action with insightful education, with it exploring the many sides to these animals, with stuff like behaviors, environments, emotions, and even interactions with other creatures. They really managed to make these animals feel alive, feel real, because instead of portraying them as just monsters, they instead presented them as they should be. Wild, unpredictable animals. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that, while outdated, a lot of these dinosaurs still hold up really well, and that's because of their behaviors and the wonderful effects they use to bring them to life. Because despite the inconsistent CGI, like yeah, some of these shots did not hold up well, for the most part they really knock it out of the park with some impressive and daring shots that still look good even to this day. Plus, the addition of practical effects was just a stroke of brilliance, because it's one thing to composite an animal into a shot, it's another to add actual animatronics and puppets, because not only can the cast interact with them, but it really is timeless, because it's actually there. It never looks fake because, well, it's real. with highlights being Martha the Mammoth, as well as every time the show gets into the medical stuff. Not only are the effects just gorgeous, but we get real veterinary information from the characters, which not only adds to the real feeling of it all, but it just shows the amount of care they put into elements like these. Because the key to making shows like this is, simply put, making it feel real. It doesn't matter how many special effects you include, it's what you do with those effects that make everything feel alive, and for the most part, Prehistoric Park accomplishes that with a mixture of beautiful triumphs and disastrous lows. I can definitely see why this series resonated with so many people. It brought a new interesting formula to the documentary format. As well as that, it wasn't afraid to branch out and teach its viewers more unknown aspects to the primeval world. However, despite this show having plenty of great elements, it unfortunately does suffer a little bit from its own success. Because as conscious as they are with the idea of saving these animals, there's often a lot that does unfortunately get overlooked. Take the poor decision making from the cast, as for some reason they decide to bring back Ice Age mammals to modern day South Africa? And in the case of Martha the Mammoth, not only do they bring her to a place she's not adapted to, but also bring her back alone, despite being a social animal. At that point, it's just animal cruelty, and that's not the only case of this series skipping over important elements to these animals, as Theo the Triceratops also is brought back alone despite being a social animal. Throw in the poor fencing all around the park too. It's nowhere near acceptable for the levels a park like this with such dangerous creatures should possibly be. But the most frustrating element of this entire series would undoubtedly have to be the constant reuse of footage. Because while it makes sense given the smaller scale of the show, it can come across as frustrating, because in how they use it, it often feels very obvious and pulls you out of the immersion they work so hard to build you in. And so, despite being a pretty solid series, it does unfortunately falter under its own concept, as many of the episodes here end up betraying a lot of ethical issues for the sake of telling a more entertaining story. It's very much a product of its time, with the series lacking that final bit of polish that Walking with Dinosaurs had. But at the end of the day, regardless of what I think of this series or its flaws, it's still a really good time, and despite never seeing it in full beforehand, I found myself getting equally enthralled and excited each episode. And it wasn't just me who thought that, as Prehistoric Park would go on to change the landscape of paleo media, with several documentaries trying and failing to imitate the success this one had, as well as this show probably inspiring in some form or another the production of a series that's near and dear to my heart, Primeval. But probably the biggest impact this series had was on people who had a desire to create their own prehistoric park, whether that be in something like Jurassic World Evolution, or especially in Prehistoric Kingdom, which was basically a love letter to the show as a whole, even bringing Nigel Marven back to voice the game, as well as throwing in some references to the series like with the Microraptors. Prehistoric Park was an unexpected surprise, with its charming attitude not only being a breath of fresh air, but as well as its willingness to both be fun and educational, it's truly something admirable. Because sadly, this show is a dying breed, with many documentaries after it failing to capture that same magic this show had. And so, despite this series ending too soon, I'll always be grateful for it. Not only because it wanted to do something different, but because it wasn't afraid to embrace the dark and beautiful world that is prehistory. But now is where I ask you peeps, do you remember Prehistoric Park? And if so, be sure to comment down below your memories of the show. And while you're at it, if you enjoyed today's video and want to see me cover more paleo media like Planet Dinosaur for example, then be sure to like this video and subscribe. Doing so not only tells me you want to see more content just like this, but it actually helps me make that content for you guys a whole lot faster. Trust me, any support is highly appreciated. You guys make these videos possible. But with that, peeps, it's been the Pink King here, and I will see you all next time.